So I'm going to open this panel by giving a brief overview of what's happening statewide in state policy, because there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of movement. Currently, but don't hold me to this number because bills are born and die every day, I think there's about 28 active pieces of legislation across the country, 14 different models of what those bills look like. And they range from everything from study commissions, working groups, funding for research, decriminalization initiatives for psilocybin, for broader classes of psychedelics substances, decrim that combines decrim and regulated access, some that are just regulated access, some that are medical access for either certain conditions or different classes of people, such as just veterans, first responders, categories like that. And the type of bill that's introduced in each state really depends on a variety of factors, but is largely driven by the politics in the state, the position of the governor, the lawmakers, the stakeholders on the ground, what they're pushing for, funding in the state, if there's money for lobbying, organized efforts to move a bill forward. And also, and I don't want to understate this, the parameters and the limits of federal law and what federal law places on the states in terms of what they can do. So there's clear examples of what states absolutely can do, removing state law penalties, providing licensure under state law for access that protects you from a state law penalty. But there's also big barriers of federal law in that states cannot reschedule under the Federal Controlled Substances Act. They can't legalize anything that's federally illegal, and they can't get around those barriers. A lot of the states are being informed by what's happening and what happened previously in cannabis. On the one hand, the regulatory models that states are looking at are very different. The substances are very different, and those distinctions need to be drawn. On the other hand, a lot, whether we like it or not, is informed by cannabis. It both helps and haunts us, I think, both politically and in a regulatory way, and there's lessons to be learned in terms of the limits of what we can do and how the federal government might react, areas where we run into federal preemption, the impact of various things we do on public opinion and whether that moves us more quickly forward or slows us down, and very difficult regulatory issues that cannabis has struggled with for a long time around equity, fairness, commercialization, both over-regulation and under-regulation that we will are grappling with and will continue to be grappling with in this space as well. So I want to, rather than going through what every state does, because that would be boring, I'm going to, instead I just want to highlight 4 reasons why I think this state policy movement and this state policy work is important and where it gets us. And in my 4 reasons, I think they also underscore why it's important that we have multiple models moving forward and ideas for different types of bills, because I think they bring different things in terms of advancing us. So first, and I think most obviously, the state laws increase lawmaker access and knowledge. We heard that earlier from the representative from New York. She didn't know anything about this issue. Now she's deeply invested. No other issue have I seen a lobby visit, one lobby visit go from blank slate to complete convert, like devoted to it. One meeting with a lawmaker can do that. And so even if a bill doesn't pass or advance, or it's not the perfect model, or it's just a study commission or a working group, those meetings happen, those contacts happen, and the number of lawmakers across the aisles in states that are becoming invested in understanding the issue just increases dramatically in ways that are very, very helpful. The second reason is just increased access. Obviously, just a greater number of people having access to something that may help them in their lives beneficially. And I think that also moves us forward in terms of public opinion. So not just the number of people who are being helped, but in 2 ways. One was highlighted this morning in the Berkeley research. Someone gets credibility if they have the personal experience or the personal knowledge and then communicating about it. So the more people who have that experience are better communicators and ambassadors for this issue. And then there's also a lesson for medical cannabis. We learned very early on in that movement that knowing someone who used medical cannabis or cannabis in a way that was beneficial in their life personally changed people's minds about it. So people come to cannabis with a preconceived notion, or they have their own life experience connected to it. And seeing someone who used it in a positive way is what changed people's minds. On that chart where you saw where we went from 1969 to now in legalization, that was a big piece of it. People knowing people who used it in a positive way. And decrim, these state models that involve decrim, I think get us there by expanding the number and the exposure, and also a number of the regulated models also bring us towards that. The third, and Shane talked about this in his talk this morning, is around the route to rescheduling on the federal level. So these state policy reforms are our best chance for a whole reclassification or whole plant or whole fungi rescheduling. The HHS, and I think this took a bunch of people by surprise, looked at the state medical cannabis laws and what doctors and states were recommending under those laws over the past 28 years, and they used that in their analysis that there's medical value, and that is the basis for the rescheduling. And so building evidence base through state policy and state policy reform and collecting that data gets us ultimately to that point in a way that I'm not sure there's another equally compelling route given the precedent of cannabis that we've just seen. And so this I highlight the medical or medicalized in some component models bring us further there because we need a tracking of why people are using these substances and how they may be bringing the medical benefit to build that evidence base. And the fourth and final, and then I'll let our real experts take over here, is and this is a little bit more conceptual, the expansion and how we think about drug use beyond the paradigm of just medical or recreational. And in this way, I think it's profound. I think a lot of individuals understand their drug use and the potential of using substances in that way. But for the government to legalize and legally regulate a substance and provide regulated access to a substance for individuals for purposes that are not purely recreational or purely medical, but are beyond that in terms of a recognition of personal growth, spirituality, wellness, their own growth is profoundly beyond, I think, what we've seen our state and federal agencies, what our whole federal government approach to drugs is, which is either you get a prescription from a doctor and you use it to treat a medical condition, or you're using it for fun, and if it's alcohol and tobacco and now cannabis, that's okay, and if it's something else, then you go to jail. So that, that I think is, and in those models, I think, and we're gonna hear more about it, are what we see in Colorado and Oregon, where they're creating tightly controlled regulatory models, but for reasons that are different than how we've sort of recognized and our government's accepted drug use before. So with that, I will sit down and I'm gonna turn it over to Angie to tell us about Oregon. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Angie Allbee. I like to break the rules when I speak and walk around. I'm sorry to all of my colleagues, but I've been sitting in airplanes for a long time yesterday. So, hello, I'm Angie Allbee. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the section manager for the Oregon Psilocybin Services section at the Oregon Health Authority Public Health Division Center for Health Protection. I lead the implementation of the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act that was passed by Oregon voters in November of 2020. And I also am the ex officio executive director of the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, which is a 16 to 18 member board appointed by the governor, and they make recommendations to OHA on our administrative rules, and then they also look at long-term sustainability of the program. So it's really an honor to be here today. Many of you already know about Oregon's model, so I'm not going to talk through the details. You've heard me in previous presentations at Horizons talking through the model. So today I'm really going to highlight some of our exciting developments and statistics. And so first off, I just want to mention that in January 2nd of 2023, we began accepting applications for 4 license types. manufacturers, laboratories, service centers, and facilitators. And we issued our first license in March of 2023. We issued all 4 license types by the end of May in 2023, and service center doors began to open to serve clients under the nation's first regulatory model for psilocybin services in summer of 2023. So I've got hot off the press our licensing stats, and hopefully I haven't washed my hands too much. So as of, I believe, as of May 6th, we have issued 322 licenses for facilitators in Oregon. Beginning in January of 2025, you don't have to be an Oregon resident to get licensed as a facilitator. So we'll be accepting applications from non-Oregon residents to be facilitators and facilitate in Oregon. We have issued 26 service center licenses, which means 26 service centers have opened their doors or are opening their doors to services. And we know through many of those stories that people have very long waiting lists, like thousands deep, of people that want to access services. And we also have 10 manufacturers licensed. We have 2 laboratories. We have 578 permitted workers that we've issued permits for. These are for folks that work on a licensed premises or provide psilocybin services to clients. So facilitators have to get a worker permit, and so do people working in those locations that are licensed. And finally, we have 25 training programs that we've approved the curriculum for. And it's important to mention that training programs are not licensed or regulated by Oregon Psilocybin Services. That is done by the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, another state agency in Oregon. And what's important about that is that we approve the curriculum, but that state agency actually does the licensing. And we just adopted some rules to make sure that those training programs are being licensed in accordance with Oregon law. And so that way we're actually building credibility and really validating and putting them on the map as a career training school. So that's really exciting. Next up, I'm going to talk about data collection and reporting, and check my time here. I could talk to you all day. But many of you wonder, why don't you have data about psilocybin services in Oregon? And so I want to talk a little bit about that. First of all, there's a provision in ORS 475A that prohibits some kinds of disclosures. So client information is protected, licensee information is protected. And so why is that important? Well, it's important because this is federally illegal, and we don't have a Cole memo or something similar that provides assurances that the federal government won't intervene in Oregon. And so we've established some good relationships with state agency partners who are part of law enforcement so that they can call us through our hotline, ask us if a location is licensed, and we can say yes or no. And that way they don't invade in our state law enforcement don't actually serve a warrant incorrectly and traumatize some of our licensees. Now, why that's important to talk about is in 2023, the Oregon legislature passed Senate Bill 303, which directs licensed service centers to collect certain aggregated client and service center level data and report that to our agency every quarter beginning in 2025. That data is, I'm going to go through it very quickly. You can read the bill if you're interested, but it includes things like, race, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, gender identity of clients, why clients are accessing services, what is the average dose consumed of psilocybin products, any adverse physical or behavioral reactions, any severe adverse behavioral or physical reactions, and there's many more data points. Also, they'll be reporting how many clients have been served. So you might wonder, well, what do you know right now? What we do know is in our product tracking system, there have been licensed service centers have to use that system to report how many product sales, how many products they've sold to clients. And as of the 9th, which I believe, I don't know what day it is, it was Friday, I think, or Thursday, 7,859 products had been sold by licensed service centers to clients who are accessing services in Oregon. 7,859 products. Now that might include secondary doses, but I want to talk about the significance of this here today. We've been clients have been served under this model, again, since last summer. And to date, if you even just cut that into half, generally speaking, we know that there have been significant numbers of people. There are equity and access issues. So we understand that affordability is a problem. All of our licensees are required to submit social equity plans to talk about systemic oppression and set goals on how they're going to help alleviate that oppression or those systemic disparities, inequities. And so to date, people are doing sliding scales, they're doing free services, they're doing subsidies, grants, scholarships, and really the community is doing great work. I don't have a lot of time, but I want to talk so much about this. Beginning in 2025, if you go on our website, we'll have a data dashboard. And after the first quarter of 2025, you'll be able to see Senate Bill 303 data published there. Right now, you can see our weekly licensing stats, and you can read the final orders that we've submitted for license denials or administrative violations. That's already up and running. Quickly, I just want to make a note. We've done a good job talking about our goals and how we're aligning and tethering to public health goals to eliminate health inequities, to address institutional bias, adversity, toxic stress and trauma, economic barriers of health. We've talked a lot about that, but what we haven't talked a lot about is the stuff we don't want to, and that's compliance, but that's a huge part of our job. We have regulatory oversight over licensees. So anyone can file a complaint, and we will open an investigation if there's a potential violation of ORS 475A, which is the law, or OAR 333, which is our administrative rule. And it's just important to note that we have to have enough evidence that there was a violation before we can issue any kind of administrative sanction. We follow the Administrative Procedures Act, and what that means is we open an investigation, we talk to witnesses, and if we have enough evidence, then we proceed with an administrative sanction that can look like a license restriction, a revocation, civil penalty, et cetera. We do a lot of technical assistance, so on our website, you can see some of the administrative guidance that we've provided to all of our licensees. I don't think many state agencies do that, but please check that out. I just want to share some stats really quickly, and that is we have received 33 complaints to date. We have 11 open investigations, and it's important to mention, too, that along with the 7,859 products that were sold to clients, there have been 3 reports to emergency services, and those were precautionary in nature. Now, to end my final minute with you all, I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of our work. We're going to open administrative rules every year, and we've just received advisory board recommendations, things like emotional supports for clients while they're in an administration session, as well as so many others. CEUs for facilitators every year to help improve and make sure that safe, equitable services are being provided in Oregon. You can all keep track of this by joining our distribution list. You can join our public listening sessions every year. We have Spanish, American Sign Language interpretation, and also CART captioning. We also have rules advisory committees that people can apply to serve on. And then there's also a public hearing on rules where you can submit your verbal comments. If you're a nonverbal communicator, you can write those comments. You can also submit written comments to us. We're very excited as we move forward to try to address equity, access, and affordability issues within the regulated framework, within the law, and also make sure that we're connecting. So we also offer community circles to Indigenous communities and other community members that feel more comfortable engaging with us in an alternate format. And I just really encourage you all to visit our website. That's all I have for you today, but thank you so much.
All right, I'm still figuring out what style presenter I am, so I'm gonna take a leaf from your book and try the strolling around version. Hello everyone, my name is Natasia Poinsatte. I am the Colorado director with the Healing Advocacy Fund, which is a nonprofit that is supporting the states of Oregon and Colorado to set up these state-regulated models for access to psychedelics in therapeutic settings. So I was asked, I guess I'll I'll share a little bit about myself beyond that. I came to this work by way of Colorado politics. I was working on progressive campaigns and ballot initiatives for about 4 years in Colorado. And I had the opportunity to work on Proposition 122, which quickly kind of stole my heart. I was working on several other initiatives at the time, and I started to kind of see the depth of potential and implications for my family, for my communities in Colorado, and I became really excited about this possibility. So from that, I transitioned to work full-time with the Healing Advocacy Fund. So I was asked to share a little bit about what's different in Colorado versus Oregon. So you probably all know, high level, we're setting up a therapeutic model for psilocybin. Colorado state regulators also have the option to add additional psychedelic medicines, but not the requirement. They'll have the choice in the future pending additional analysis. And in addition to the therapeutic model, we also fully removed criminal penalties for the personal use of the natural medicines that were covered, which includes cultivation, possession, and sharing. So, of course, that's the biggest single difference. But in terms... when it comes to the regulated model itself, there's also a number of significant differences. Our language included more significant protections for people who are licensed professionals in other fields to directly participate without being punished or disciplined by their licensing board. So that's people that work in mental health and in medicine to participate directly. And as the state has embarked on its rulemaking process, they are now creating rules that will have a sort of two-tiered licensing approach where someone's either a facilitator or a clinical facilitator. And if you have one of those license types that allows you to practice psychotherapy or medicine, then you will be a clinical facilitator, and you will be allowed to incorporate your training and your scope of practice in that other license type into your work as a facilitator. So that's a very significant difference from Oregon. And it's really interesting in terms of the opportunities and then also the challenges that it presents as we start to think about how really are we going to allow people to integrate this new modality into their existing practice. And so some of the questions come up are what locations types can this occur at? In our law, the therapy itself can occur not just at healing centers, which will be similar to Oregon Service Centers, but also at private residences in contexts like hospice and palliative care, which, as we've heard in prior presentations, there's a lot of potential there. And then there's significant questions about how to do that safely, how to provide the support in those different environments that come with a different set of variables. There will also be opportunities for people to practice at existing healthcare locations. And then a big one that we're seeing is that there are many private practice therapists who want to incorporate this as a modality at their existing office space. And so the types of questions that we're trying to answer is how do we set up a regulatory system that allows for this range of different options, also recognizing that not everybody that's participating will be a licensed clinician. And so our role at the Healing Advocacy Fund is really to take this kind of vast world of knowledge that's out there to inform this process, do really in-depth analysis, bring in the insights that we're getting from Oregon, as well as all of you, many of you literally that are in this room, and bring that to the state regulators to consider. Because the reality is they are learning very quickly, and it's been a steep learning curve. They're doing an amazing job, but they don't have the time to go as in-depth in certain specific areas. So I want to give an example. The state is now contemplating regulations around touch and what are the requirements for consent around touch prior to the session and during. And there's been a question, okay, we're allowing people to incorporate these other license types. Some of those license types also include touch. So will those people or will they not be allowed to incorporate those forms of touch if it's within their secondary licensure? And then what are the implications? And there's certain conditions or reasons that people might be seeking access where touch could be very beneficial. And one of those that we've been in conversation around recently is people that are seeking access for pain conditions, for instance. So encouraging the state to consider the diversity of perspectives there while continuously centering safety, ethics, and affordable access. And those things are not always so easy to balance. They're actually, I would say, constantly in tension, and that's where the challenge of this work comes into play. But what we're seeing in Colorado is that they're settling on some areas where, you know, it's really clear that safety is integral when it comes to the training process for facilitators. If you don't get that right, if you don't get those basic requirements right, you're a lot less likely to have a safe program. And so we put a lot of emphasis on supporting the state to analyze the requirements in Oregon, think about what seems to be working really well, where is there room for improvement, and then making some changes. So Colorado does have different minimum training requirements for Oregon, and our hope is that the two states can be in this iterative process where we're learning from each other. One of the big differences in terms of facilitator training is that Colorado will have 150 didactic hours required and a practicum similar to Oregon of 40 hours, but they've decided to add this 6-month consultation period during which time somebody will have a training license, and they'll be required to be in consultation with a supervisor, and that supervisor can either be a licensed facilitator in Colorado, but they're actually creating a whole nother license type, which is called a distinguished educator license, that does not have to be somebody in Colorado. And perhaps I'm planting this as a seed for you all, because as we know, there's a lot of expertise in Colorado, yes, but outside of it. And what we want is for people that have been developing these skill sets, this knowledge over years, in many cases decades, to be able to serve as a distinguished educator in Colorado and provide that consultation, so that as these facilitators are stepping into this new profession, they actually are asking that they're having those hard conversations as they start to practice, and they have somebody with more experience that they can go to. They can do this in a group of up to 10 students. We're also looking at requiring continuing education, and then allowing for peer support groups to be a component of that continuing education piece. Really, again, encouraging conversation, encouraging learning in real time, recognizing that this is all very new. We don't have all the answers. We have a lot more questions than answers. And the way that I look at both the programs in Oregon and Colorado is, at essence, they're this incredible living laboratory where we, as a state in Colorado, have voted to allow people to have this option, to explore what works for them in their mental health, their physical health, their spiritual health on their terms. And we're simply creating a container where there are standards for ethics, for safety, for accountability. There is a process, and people have information about that process. So they'll have information about whether or not the facilitator they're working with does have one of those secondary license types, and what kind of scope that license type has. And I think that this is really a sort of unprecedented giving of autonomy to people to make their own choices. In Colorado, even to a greater degree, because we also kind of have these multiple pathways where people can choose personal use. But if they want this structure, they want to know more about the level of training and education of their facilitator, they have this state-regulated model. And we are working really hard in this moment to help the state get it as right as possible in terms of timeline, with my last 45 seconds. So the state's going to finalize its rules and regulations around August, but drafts of those rules are coming out every day. Not every day, sorry, that would be really intense. It's still pretty intense. They're coming out every few weeks, and we're reviewing them really closely. We're bringing in experts kind of across these different spectrums and encouraging them to participate in the process, because now is the time. This program will be shaped over the next few months, and once it's shaped, you know, it's launching in January. Of course, we'll have opportunities to change it, but we're creating the foundation now. So with that, I just want to really deeply thank those of you who have participated in informing this process. You're many, and I think you've made a really amazing difference. I think we stand to do something incredible in Colorado. Thank you for your time.
Uju and Dinawe Maganiduk, Diindiisi and Djinakaz, Makinak Waju and Dunjaba, Migizi and Dudame. My name is Christine Diindiisi McCleave. I am Turtle Mountain Ojibwe, or Anishinaabe. I am Eagle Clan. I'm going to open with a little protocol, additional protocol, which is, I just spoke to you in Ojibwe language. That's my protocol introduction. Gichi miigwich, gichi manidu niwin, waywinding, gizis, nibi, bagi danamaudgwin, bema daziwin, binashinayag, gagunyag, manidush, mashkiki, ninga ki, zawe nimishimanan, Ginawind, Nungum, Anishinaabe, Miigwech. I give thanks in the four directions for the sun, the moon, the waters, the air, the birds, the fish, the four-leggeds, the bugs that crawl, the medicines, and our Mother Earth. Honor our work here today for the people. Thank you. Even though I was invited here to speak about policy, I think it's really important to follow those spiritual protocols. And if not in policy, I mean, I think it's actually even more important in policy because we are setting these rules and making these regulations for the people. And if we forget and lose sight of the people and who we are as human beings and our connection to these medicines, then what are we even doing, right? Okay, I can't see my notes. There's double my slides here. I guess maybe I don't need my notes. Is that creator telling me I don't need my notes? Okay, so I do this work because of my ancestors, from my grandmother, from my grandfather, my great-grandfather Hools. And so if we're going to talk about policy and moving humanity towards greater healing, awareness, and awakening, we have to recognize the historical context and where we've been. And I am a dual citizen. I'm a citizen of the United States of America, and I'm a citizen of my tribal nation. My tribal nation is a sovereign nation based on the treaties that were made with the United States government as this nation was being born. They acknowledged the inherent sovereign rights of the original people of this land. The treaties did not grant us sovereignty, but they acknowledged our sovereignty. In exchange for all the land that this country and all the resources and all the wealth have been built on, the federal government promised us three things: education, healthcare, and rations. And so there is a federal trust obligation to tribal nations to this day. Yes, I still pay taxes. I can get some money for college, but I don't get free money from the government. I can get access to education on the reservation and health services. And it's really important to acknowledge that this boarding school policy was also a federal policy to assimilate indigenous people. Native American children were taken by force and sent to boarding schools, forced to speak English, forced to convert to Christianity, beaten if they spoke their indigenous language, beaten and punished in brutal ways if they prayed, sang, or danced in their traditions. And this is really important. This is something that's not being really acknowledged in the full psychedelic movement, that is very ironic. That now those traditions and practices and ancient spiritual sacred knowledge that had to be protected, that had to be practiced in secret and go underground, we've gone the wrong direction, has survived despite colonization and attempted genocide. A lot of people in the world right now are concerned with genocide in the present day, yet this country has not acknowledged its genocide. Yeah, that wasn't in my slide notes, so creator wanted me to say something else. So I am currently the moderator for the Colorado Natural Medicine Health Act's federally recognized American Tribes and Indigenous Communities Working Group. It's a long name. I'm calling it the Tribal Working Group. So as we know, Prop 122 was a ballot initiative. It passed, and then Senate had to make some updates, extend the timeline, and due to the advocacy of grassroots Native people in Denver and Colorado, SB 23290 was created to include this working group. So I am very excited about what Colorado is doing in that they are setting a precedent. Now there is the obligation and opportunity for nation-to-nation consultation, government-to-government consultation. It can be nation-to-nation with the federal government and tribal nations, but government-to-government, states and even municipal governments can do consultation with tribal nations. That process, can be complicated to navigate. Tribal nations have a lot to deal with. They are tiny nations trying to deal with the infrastructure and needs of their peoples, as well as the impacts of colonization and the trauma and the challenges that exist in our communities. And when you come to them and you say psychedelics, they may not even understand what you're talking about because we don't use that word. We have our medicines, and not all our medicines are psychoactive compounds too. So tribal consultation with the nations requires building a relationship and taking time, a lot of time, to start the conversation and understand where tribal nations are at in your state. Okay, so the tribal working group has been comprised of individuals, there are some tribal representatives from the Ute Mountain tribes in Colorado, and the mandate states that, I have it written here, but I'm not sure I'll read it. I will. Section 6 in Colorado Revised Statute, repeal and enact with amendments, federally recognized tribes, the director shall establish, okay, 4 things are avoiding the misappropriation and exploitation of the federally recognized American tribes and indigenous people, communities, cultures, and religions. Avoiding the misappropriation and exploitation. There's a lot of that going on. And I don't think we've talked about it until now at this weekend, and I don't see a lot of that conversation happening, right? It needs to, how are these policies and pieces of legislation and this movement overall affecting indigenous people? Avoiding the excess commercialization of natural medicine product and natural medicine services. Any conservation issues associated with the legalization and regulation of natural medicine or natural medicine product, including the potential for further depletion of peyote due to peyote being a source of mescaline, and best practices in open communication to build trust and understanding. I'm doing my doctoral research on Native American healing with peyote and the impacts of the psychedelic movement, and I'm asking 3 main research questions. What are Native American people doing for their healing? Not all of us do peyote. Not all of us are members of the Native American Church. But there is a great deal of historical trauma that exists, and intergenerational trauma, and epigenetics, and blood memory that needs to be addressed. So we have a great need for healing. And I want to know what Native people are doing and what they need. And then I'm going to ask also about members of the Native American Church, people's perspective on the Native American Church, why maybe they don't want to be part of it, because it is a pan-Indian syncretic religion that has incorporated Christianity in some cases, and also their perspectives on the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. Is it sufficient? Is it in danger? What do they think is needed? And then the last one is, what are their perspectives and opinions on the psychedelic movement? I fully expect to encounter people who don't even know what that is. And then maybe some who are very concerned about the impacts of the psychedelic movement, and maybe some who are excited for the legalization and decriminalization of some of these medicines. So look for those results next year, and say a prayer for me to get that research done. Okay, there are other things to consider. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, that has a lot to say about our rights to health and the rights to protect our medicine. Cultural and intellectual property rights are really set up under a capitalist colonial paradigm to protect people's right to use the medicines. It doesn't protect the medicines themselves. So There are the rights of nature, which Bolivia and Ecuador have put into their constitution, the rights of Mother Earth. And a couple of tribal nations, Ho-Chunk and White Earth, have added also the rights of Mother Nature, and White Earth added the rights of Manuman, which is our sacred food, which is wild rice, which has already been patented, and there's a global wild rice market, and there's a whole issue around that, right? So indigenous peoples have the right to protect access and access their medicine. And so we need to consider that. I know there's a lot of people saying, well, then we'll just go with synthetics. But even the synthetics are derived from those plant medicines, which come from these ancient lineages and traditions. And these plant medicines have spirits, right? That's why I opened with a prayer. I have to acknowledge the spiritual. We, as indigenous people, have a worldview that is more holistic, right? Everything is connected. I'm talking about policy, I say a prayer. And, I'm taking a synthetic compound. What is the spirit that those molecules were derived from? Because even the synthetics now have a synthetic spirit attached to them. So we do need to consider that. And we need to consider, like I said, not only the rights of indigenous peoples, but the rights of the medicines. And with that, I'm over time, so I'll stop.
Good morning, afternoon, as it may be. My name is Bryan Hubbard. I am the former chairman and executive director of the Kentucky Opioid Abatement Advisory Commission. And I would like to begin by thanking Mr. Kevin Baltic, the organizers and sponsors of Horizon, for according me the privilege of being here with you today. I'd also ask your conversational forbearance as I get ready to move forward, because English is my second language. The opioid epidemic is the gravest engineered humanitarian catastrophe to play out within American society since the end of the 19th century. Over the past, we have lost more individuals in this society to drug overdose death over the past 4 years than we lost soldiers in World War II. We have lost more human beings to opioid overdose over the past 10 years than we lost soldiers in World War I, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam in 17 years of combined brutal warfare. For all of the best intentions, for all of the hard work that has been done since OxyContin was detonated in Appalachia in 1996, we are witnessing generationally compounding devastation play out across all sectors of American society. The opioid epidemic is an indiscriminate and ecumenical destroyer of all. $54 billion has been distributed by the creators of this crisis to make small financial amends for the cost we have all incurred in the lives and treasure of our society to address its consequences. The state of Kentucky is the recipient of $842 million, which will be paid out over 16 years, a sum that represents roughly 8.5 months of Purdue Pharma's sales of OxyContin. When I was asked to serve as the first chairman and executive director of the Opioid Commission, I declared that the very most important thing we could do was look for Kentucky's Manhattan Project opportunity to foster a therapeutic breakthrough which would address the intractable physiology and neurochemistry of opioid dependence. Our best practices model have an unacceptable 75% failure rate. And that failure rate and the inability to resolve physiological opioid withdrawal is what drives the repetitious cycle of repeated relapse, overdose, destruction, and death. As a result of personal, individualized, and intense research, it appeared after I heard the word ibogaine for the very first time on July 29th of 2022 that this particular medicine, engineered from on high, represented the Manhattan Project opportunity we were looking for. We proposed to take a small sum of the state settlement dollars, 5% of $842 million, and devote it to the creation of a public-private partnership which would pay for FDA-approved clinical trials with ibogaine as a breakthrough therapeutic for opioid use disorder. Thank you. We developed a strategy which included a press conference announcement on May the 31st of 2023, which was followed by 3 extensive congressional-level 5-hour public hearings which examined the science of ibogaine, the lived experience of those who had received, provided, and had sent loved ones for it, as well as, at the request of the University of Kentucky, the FDA's position as to whether it would even approve a clinical trial given the cardiac risks associated with the substance. A hearing that was unexpectedly successful for proponents, for they heard 2 FDA officials themselves say the question for ibogaine was not one of risk, but how risk could be mitigated. And if risk can be safely mitigated, there is no reason why the FDA would hesitate to approve a clinical research trial for treatment of opioid dependence with the substance. Unfortunately, despite the fact that we were within clear sight of a successful commission vote with a majority of the 9-member membership ready to commit funds, a general election occurred in November of 23, which saw the change of leadership out of the Office of Attorney General, the office which held my appointment power. The new Attorney General is an individual who was driven by a malicious connivance that is typical of the brick-in-the-wall politician who has sniffed at the throne of power that is the Mitch McConnell machine in the state of Kentucky, and who, as he campaigned across the state, would say, without the least bit of irony or humor, that J. Edgar Hoover was his boyhood hero. The end result of termination, while certainly a disappointing shock in the context of those facts, was not a surprise. Despite the disappointing end of the effort, there were some important lessons learned. Number 1, when we recognize that the opioid epidemic is but the most visible and tragic symptom of profound spiritual affliction that is destroying American society, we therefore see our opening through which we can introduce and illuminate ibogaine's potential in such a way as to motivate mass movement support for its availability to all who need it. When we explain that ibogaine reverses the neurochemical brain injury caused by opioid dependence, restores the sense of autonomy every individual should have in terms of being able to exercise choice over their lives instead of being imprisoned by compulsion, and then finally explain its most important attribute, which is an affirmation of every person's spiritual identity as the child of an almighty creator whose essence is pure and unconditional love, and who also has unique and special purpose in their life. We are able to take a deep red, politically conservative, religiously fundamentalist state like Kentucky and see critical majoritarian support to the ratio of 60-40 in full-throated support for accelerating ibogaine's availability to all who need it as quickly as possible. We learned that the opposition to ibogaine was bipartisan, as was its support. That there were certain categories of opposition which could be navigated. Those include reactionary attitudes to psychedelics, which, when explained that ibogaine can be safely and appropriately administered for a medically specific purpose within a clinically controlled setting, can be overcome, as can those objections related to cardiac risk, Given the study published by Dr. Nolan Williams through the journal Nature Medicine in January, which demonstrates that the magnesium ibogaine protocol mitigates cardiac risk. There is one category of opposition which cannot be mitigated, and that is that of the big pharma apparatchiks who leverage institutional power to maintain a monopoly which monetizes sustained human illness and misery. On May the 7th, an emergency room doctor by the name of Dr. Matt Bevins published an opinion column in the Substack publication Racket, which is the publication of Matt Taibbi, an investigative journalist, and he said, when it comes to the opioid crisis, this massive, deadly pandemic of addiction we've unleashed, we stroll past whistling and look guiltily away, then whirl back around, whip out the brain-dead microphone, and loudly announce that we expect to be paid handsomely to provide additional addictive opioids to treat the same pandemic. We declare this with wide-eyed innocence and get indignant if anyone questions this plan, even as internal corporate communications now available show big pharma corporations rubbing their hands gleefully at the thought of all that buprenorphine cash. That's right. Internal corporate communications, millions of pages are now available, and they can be researched online at the Opioid Industry Document Archive hosted by the University of California, San Francisco. Failure can breed success, and I am proud to say here today that as of this morning, there are 7 individual states that are given serious consideration as to how they leverage their finances and their bureaucratic institutions to foster clinical research trials with ibogaine as a breakthrough therapeutic for opioid use disorder, substance use disorder, and any other mental health condition for which it shows efficacy. I've had the privilege of meeting with top-level policymakers in the state of Ohio, and I'm in communication with either legislators, policymakers, or elected leadership in the states of Washington, Nevada, Missouri, New Mexico, Arizona, and one state that I am bound in confidence to not announce that is moving swiftly to do its due diligence research as to whether it can replicate the Kentucky model. I am convinced that if we of common mind, heart, and soul, regardless of political persuasion in this room, recognize the fight that we are in and make a commitment that we are going to deliver good tidings unto the meek, bind up the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound, we shall win. Thank you for your time and attention.
This is the 3rd time I've heard him speak in the last couple of days, and everybody that goes after him says, I'm so disappointed that I have to follow him. So I'm glad I'm not giving a speech and only asking questions. So the first question is, how can Oregon protect licensed medical professionals so they can participate in the psilocybin program?
Thank you. So first of all, there's nothing in our statute that prevents us from licensing any other licensed professional in Oregon. So we continue to license people that have many different professional license types in Oregon. The issue is that we don't have any sort of requirement for those licensing boards to not penalize the folks that we license to do work in Oregon under our regulated model. So in 2021, I reached out to all of the licensing boards and wanted to connect and to ask, is there anything in your statute that would be risky or prohibitive for anyone that is licensed that would also like to be licensed under our model? And to date, we haven't heard any official guidance, but we just encourage all of the folks that apply for licenses to check in with their licensing boards.
Thank you. The next question is, what is the payment structure for providing services in Colorado, including accessing supervision through distinguished educators?
So in Colorado, the fees of the program have not been determined. That's actually the last thing that's going to be addressed in the rules process, because they're still figuring out all the other details which have implications for the fees. But we should know by August when we have final rules.
Thank you. Bryan, this question's for you. In Kentucky, can you speak to the private-public partnerships necessary to support research of psychedelics for drug recovery?
Thank you for the question. These public dollars from whatever source belong to the people, and it is of the utmost importance that those dollars be protected and insulated from as much risk as possible. And that means that within the context of the creation of a public-private partnership from which there would be a match by a drug developer, you would essentially require the drug developer to assume all risk and expense with everything associated with obtaining the FDA's green light to pursue a clinical research trial with an approved IND. It is only when that green light is given that state resources are then paid to cover the execution of the clinical trials within that state's borders through whatever health system or university health system has the appropriate expertise and facility to create that trial. There are 3 additional criteria that need to be met, and those are a recognition of the state's commercialization interests so that there is return on investment for the people's money, a definitive plan as to how to secure all third-party payor approval for the delivery of ibogaine treatment, and a pharmacy benefit plan that covers those which fall through all those cracks. And then finally, some form of recognition of the societies and civilizations from which this knowledge comes, and a return on investment to the NGOs who are the best stewards of their, best help steward their future.
Thank you for the questions. I know there were many more. Thank you to the panelists. I'm sure that they will make themselves available to you so you can ask those questions. We have, oh, the timer needs to restart then, please. So I have my timing. So we will be able to get to all these great questions. Angie, this question's for you. Did you say you've licensed only 2 psilocybin manufacturers? Has it been sufficient to supply whole state and all 35 centers? And will home, sorry, there's emojis in here. Will home psilocybin administration be allowed? Thanks, Sue.
What was the last part of the question?
Will home psilocybin administration be allowed?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, we've issued 10 manufacturer licenses, and we've, that doesn't count the many applicants or future applicants that we're working with that are trying to establish both service centers and manufacturers in Oregon. I won't get into it too much, but local governments, cities and counties can adopt ordinances to prohibit us from licensing service centers or manufacturers under the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act. And even if they don't adopt an ordinance, they can actually create more prohibitive regulation of psilocybin-related businesses in their local jurisdictions. So the folks that are being licensed, we're working very closely with to help them navigate. So it's quite a lengthy process. The second part of your question had to do with in-home administration. And under the current law, ORS 475A, which was created by the Oregon Psilocybin Services Act, the only place that a client can access services is at a licensed service center. So it's going to require a legislative change, and unfortunately we can't do that. We're a state agency, we can adopt rules, but the Oregon legislature would have to pass a piece of legislation to allow that to happen. And so as we move forward, there are a number of equity and access challenges, and that is an example of one of them.
Thank you. The next question is for Colorado. How frequent will the required supervision be within the 6-month training license period? Weekly, biweekly, monthly?
The requirement is for 50 hours of consultation across 6 months, and the person must be actively providing natural medicine services during that time to make sure that they are actually engaging and then can bring that back for the consultation. And then there's specific requirements as well in terms of what topics need to be covered. So for instance, boundaries, of course, ethics, physical touch, and working through in real life situations as challenges arise around those.
Thank you. Bryan, this question's for you. Who are the drug developers that you propose to work with in researching ibogaine?
It is not an extensive universe, and I almost hesitate to name them by name because I don't want to leave anybody off. I think it's suffice to say that among those that have expressed interest in the development of ibogaine as a treatment in opioid use disorder, the universe is not extensive, but it is large enough to be competitive. And I would estimate that there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 players who are going to be very credible in any process that would involve the solicitation, review of proposals, and the selection of a successful development. With all due respect to our universities, sometimes their processes can be cumbersome and inefficient. And as I have spoken with individual states, I have cautioned that any notion that the university should be the drug developer as well as the separate and independent verifier of any sort of clinical trial endangers both finances and time.
Thank you. The next question, is there data on recreational psychedelic use among the indigenous community? How does this impact traditional ceremonies?
Can you repeat the question? No, I don't think there's data on recreational use. How does it impact ceremonies? So I think if people are collecting, I know there have been some studies, some surveys online asking people about their recreational use. I haven't taken such surveys. I don't know if there's a demographics in there asking if people identify as indigenous. Also, you know, indigenous is a global term. So indigenous is contextual, indigenous to where. If you are going to add that kind of demographics information to your surveys, it's nuanced. There are people living in the United States who are indigenous to North America, but maybe not indigenous to tribes that are within the United States. And so the terminology can differ. I mean, we'll never get away from being called American Indian because that's written into legislation. So American Indian Alaska Native is the federal language that identifies us. So I'm not going to be surveying people about recreational use of different substances. I'm mainly focused on peyote, and I know that there is another researcher out there who's Native American and doing research around psilocybin. So we need more indigenous researchers to lead this kind of study and to find this information out. And what the impacts are is, you know, we're also trying to find that out as well. I mean, I can speak to my personal experience, and I'm sure if you Google me, you can hear me tell you how I've been very traumatized by many things. That's the work I do, is, you know, trauma healing, and I'm here because I'm trying to heal my own trauma and for my family and my relatives and my community. And the impact on indigenous ceremonies is, I don't think the psychedelic movement has changed it too much. Maybe it's ticked it up a notch, because even prior to, I think things really picked up steam after the pandemic and, you know, the Netflix documentary and whatnot. But even before that, there was this thing about, Vine Deloria Jr. wrote about it in the 70s, around the Civil Rights era and the American Indian movement, that there was this pan-Indian religion starting, and New Age people were drawn to this, you know, mysticism, and really wanted to know more from indigenous peoples, Native Americans specifically. And, you know, that's of course also when Maria Sabina hit the, you know, world stage. And so I think that there has been generations and decades of this fascination with our spirituality and our ceremonies, and yet no actual acknowledgement of the impacts of the creation of this nation state on those practices. And there's some terms that we have in Indian country to describe these things. I'm not going to share them, but, you know, some of them make fun of it, and some are really, you know, coming from a place of hurt. That that we had to, one of my slides was about the ghost dance movement, which was a spiritual revival movement in which people were praying, because at the time it was the buffalo were being killed by the US Army, and our children were being taken to boarding schools. And so people had to gather at night in secret to dance and pray for the survival of their way of life. And that ghost dance movement and those powerful ceremonies scared some non-Indigenous people to the point that the Wounded Knee Massacre, they sent the US Army in there to kill people. The Wounded Knee Massacre was because of the ghost dance movement. So how does it impact our ceremonies today? Just the existence of non-Indigenous shaman practitioners is something that we need to be talking about. And if you want to tune into the Colorado Tribal Working Group, we will talk about that when we talk about misappropriation and exploitation and how does it impact our medicines, our religions, and our way of life. Those are public meetings. We had our first one on Wednesday, May 8th, and we will meet monthly. So if you go to the Natural Medicine Health Act website, you'll be able to register to join in and follow our work as we discuss these things.
Christine, as you think of the models your co-presenters have shared, can you imagine building in respect and reverence for the medicines within these models?
That's such a beautiful question. Thank you to whoever asked that. I don't know if it's possible because the models and the systems that we're working within are colonial. It's government and academic, and we're talking about capitalism, and there's the opportunity and the hope that even as these programs go forward, that things can eventually change. I think it almost has to be the cart before the horse in this case, that as people come in contact with the medicines and as they get the healing that they are seeking, that they may then be able to turn their attention outward to the rest of humanity and the planet and what we need to really evolve our society to a place where we can have that kind of reverence within our systems. I don't think we can come up with a policy or a model within a broken system at this point.
Thank you. And this question's for everyone. How can the psychedelic ecosystem most effectively transcend the political divides that have been exacerbated by our culture wars? Anyone want to start?
I would love to.
Bryan.
We in the company of spiritualists here, ain't we? The message, the way we win political wars, the way we win culture wars is to win a spiritual war. And when we get out there and we are able to say, when we put that phone down and we take off that filter of manufactured mass media division, and we can look at each other and say, we share unity in kinship wherein we bear the images of an almighty creator whose essence is pure and unconditional love, and that as a human being you are worthy of honor and love from me as my kin and as my fellow family member in this privilege that we have of human existence. When we can speak to those overarching spiritual truths and our unity as spiritual beings, we have the capacity to take every bit of that trash, discard it so that progress can make its way.
Tamar.
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, I just, you know, to continue that, I think, you know, when I think about Oregon's regulated model and the ecosystem, not just the ecosystem in Oregon, not just the licensees, but the entire landscape, the global landscape, I think it's really important that we all take responsibility and have a shared responsibility. State government cannot do perfect regulation and keep everyone safe. Licensees alone under a regulated model can't be the perfect facilitator for every person. Service centers may not understand how to not re-traumatize certain populations of people. And so we all need to keep learning. We need to learn together. We need to communicate. And I think that it's really, really important that the siloing and the us versus them mentality is put aside, because in order for us to actually have a global psychedelic ecosystem that works in whatever respective ways, whatever state you're in, whatever model you have, or the unregulated space, I think it's really important that we have a shared respect and shared responsibility together. So,
I agree, and I'll just add, you know, in working on the state bills and state legislation, I feel like we are in a very bipartisan space. Like it's transcending many other issues, in that people from all different backgrounds and ideas and politics are coming to the table and supporting it on its merits. But I think we also have to be very intentional and cautious about maintaining that. Sometimes when I think about different issues, they quickly fall on one side or the other, and then I can't even figure out why one party supports it and the other doesn't on its principle. It's just like, my enemy likes it, therefore I hate it. And so I think we could easily spiral into that, like many other issues of which there should be broader unity around could, and so that we should have some intentionality about that and be thoughtful in how we reach out and talk and advocate on the issue.
One last thing, if I may. The dividend of division is control. And all of us who believe in divine medicine recognize that one of its chief properties is to reveal the folly of external systems of control. And the enemy recognizes that. So the spiritual unity that we're talking about up here is absolutely the keystone to success.
I'll add just something quickly. I think there's also, I know for myself personally, I have been challenged a lot in this role. I came into it with a lot of insecurities, and I had to face that, and I have been challenged to continuously check in with my own integrity and find that kind of center in myself, which then allows me to turn outwards to the people around me, not all of whom agree with me, not all of whom like me, and be able to listen and have conversations and actually see and hear them and try to understand them. And that is not easy, actually. It's been really challenging, but I think it's something that we're all kind of called to do in this moment. And if we can find the capacity in ourselves to do that, the potential, I appreciate what you said, Christine, and I hear you, and I feel and hear as well the fear around taking something that is sacred and inserting it into these systems that are deeply flawed and in many cases harmful. And I think, you know, for me, we're in these systems anyways. And so then it becomes like, what choice do you want to make in how you live your life? What vision do you want to be a part of? And I do believe in this vision, and I feel myself centered in that. But it doesn't mean I'm not going to make mistakes. So I think a humility, a willingness to acknowledge those mistakes when they occur, and then to just try to operate from a place of love and care to the extent possible.
I would like to see us not decolonize, but re-indigenize. Because the term decolonization puts the emphasis on colonization. And indigenous peoples around the globe, although not a monolith, have some things in common around their ontologies and cosmologies, epistemologies, and axiology is just to throw it all, just, you know, gotta make use of that PhD. So I think there's from my culture, Anishinaabe people have our 7 grandfather teachings, which we refer to as our original instructions. And these are the instructions that tell us how to be a human being. Like, it is that simple. But those values really do tell us how to show up in all parts of our life. And I think if we can I think that is the thing. There are several prophecies. My tribe has one. It's called the 8th fire. And it's 7 generations of contact with colonization, some devastation, some loss of life, hardships, that after the 7th generation, when the 8th generation comes and lights their fire, that humanity will be at a point where they have a choice. And they will have 2 paths before them. One path is to continue with destruction, extraction, and suffering. And the other path is to choose to come back into harmony and right relationship with each other and with the earth. And a lot of us believe we are living in these prophetic times. And there are Hopi prophecies and other prophecies that I've read about from the Leon Shenandoah. And all of these prophecies talk about how someday white people will come to indigenous people asking for their knowledge. And we're living that right here, right? And so it's not just the medicine you seek, it's the way of life that is in relationship with those medicines and in relationship with each other. So we're here to re-indigenize our world.
Tamar, is there a trade-off between safety around usage of a medicine and accessibility and freedom to use it? What is the best way to navigate this moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, gets to the heart of, I think, what the struggle is with the development of many of the state policies. It's how to, maximize accessibility, liberty, freedom, while at the same time, if you're creating a government program of which there's government involvement and oversight, that you're also then providing to people who access it a level of safety and responsibility that they expect and I think are owed when the government's sort of sanctioning and regulating something. But it's hard, and this is actually what I meant. I only gave one line to it in my talk about what we see in cannabis, that we struggle with it being both over-regulated and under-regulated, and both cause problems, and finding out the areas of where it's really important that we invest in regulation and oversight, because that's critical to safety, but we don't create rules and costs and burdens that, make it inaccessible, make it inequitable, make it completely, unable to function, as we've seen in some areas with cannabis, and hopefully we won't see here too. So I think it's a fine line. It's also, as I said, driven by the parameters of federal law. It's actually much easier for a state to just remove penalties and not do anything than to affirmatively regulate in some ways, although then doing that invites more federal interference and potential of enforcement. So I think it's really a balance of those considerations, of the legal considerations, and how to navigate forward. I don't think we figured it out. I mean, I think what we're going to see, it's the pure laboratories of experimentation among the states. Different states are going to go with different models, and they're going to have to come back and adjust and adapt and change based on what other states have done and what works best. So.
Thank you. Does someone have something to add?
Oh, I just think, obviously I resonate with that, and I think it's really about finding the right regulations, and I think that that's the effort that we're in now, is identifying what really is core to safety, because we do know that the feeling of safety in these experiences is so integral to efficacy, to the impact that we're trying to create. And I've seen in Colorado, when the state regulators kind of try to take the model for cannabis and apply it to psychedelics or to psilocybin, it doesn't translate. It makes sense that they're looking to the model that they already have as, you know, a starting point. But the questions of like, what are the risks? They're very, very different for a therapeutic modality or approach. And so, for instance, the quantities of actually mushrooms themselves are going to be minute compared to the cannabis industry. And that was a conversation we had to have with our regulators of like, this isn't, don't think dispensary. And they hear that, but then it's like they apply the same rules for a dispensary. And so there's a lot of give and take there. But it's a learning process. Everybody's learning, and that's the exciting part about it. So we're not going to get the rules right the first time in Colorado. We're thankful we can learn from Oregon and learn with Oregon. And whoever comes next can learn from us, and it's exciting as well.
And I want to just add one thing also, because this is such an important conversation. It also very much depends on which state agency in government is regulating. For example, we're able to talk about addressing racism and institutional bias and the harms done by systems like our own Oregon Health Authority. We're able to talk about how to address adversity, toxic stress, and trauma, and economic drivers of health and access to equitable preventative health care. We might not be able to talk about that if we were a different state agency in Oregon. And we're very much, you know, I think able to align and tether our work and our strategic plan for our section and, you know, with those overarching public health goals. I think in many states, public health looks differently than it does in Oregon. In Oregon, it's your climate advocates, it's where you get reproductive health care, HIV support, it's, you know, your drinking water, and so much more, you know, and so I think that it's also people learning about the agencies that are doing the work, and you know, we also partner with 177 community-based organizations that lead public health work in Oregon. So we're amplifying the voices of those organizations that do that work to also gain feedback from them as part of the public health system and the state agency at large. So I also think that we also are bound to certain mission, vision, values, and expectations from our governor as part of the executive branch, and then of course the federal guidelines. So I think that every state is different. Every state agency is different, and the way that we engage is different because we have to fulfill the needs of our state. And so, you know, I think that's an important consideration as well.
Thank you. I think in addition to looking at it from public health and therapeutic models perspective, you know, in Colorado it's been decriminalized, so we're talking about community, spiritual, and religious use as well, which won't be going through the same regulatory systems. And I think one thing that needs to be improved upon, because Colorado's not a retail model, it's a cash program, so they don't have money for public education, right? So if somebody's not going through the, you know, certified people, there's still the need for education around harm reduction, and this is where we need, you know, the philanthropic sector to fill the gap, and our traditional healers to also be in community with people to help keep people safe.
Thank you. Tamar, I'd like to give you the last couple of minutes to close us out.
Me? Okay. Well, I mean, I think that just this panel to me is very much about like, we're at the very, very beginning, right? These is like the first couple states, the first ideas are percolating in terms of state policy, not in terms of like the obviously history of experience and the lineage and those things that were discussed. And I think we're at, you know, as I opened up, we're at the very beginning stage where we have a lot of models that are developing and moving forward. I think it's important that it's an incubator, that we function as an incubator, as a movement for developing all those ideas, for incorporating some pieces here in some states and other pieces in another state, and learning how to sort of develop and maximize that. I think one of the I think there's a couple like really hard questions. That question that we just asked about regulation and where the right line is, that is incredibly difficult. I think probably the most difficult question is the one about the indigenous lineage and whether those are included in the models or not, and like what's the best way to do that in a way that is not, you know, co-opting as we move forward. We don't create something that's exploiting and taking and manipulating something, and that's a huge challenge that I think every model I've seen in every state is struggling with and doesn't probably make, because they're not asking the questions in the right places but don't have the right answers to. So there's some very core, I think, fundamental questions having to do with how we approach that, how we approach the model generally, what model's right for what substance. But where we are now, I feel, is very much at the beginning. It's exploratory. We need to look at what other states are doing. We need to improve upon those models. I'm sort of, this is really boring, but I'm at heart like an incrementalist. Like, I think little steps spiral into bigger steps until we're like a big boulder rolling down the hill, crushing prohibition and all the bad things. So it's not a very fun thing to say. I believe in incrementalism, but I really do. In the context of state policy reform, I think that's what it is. Our little victories, even our little failures, build into future victories because we learn from them until we've really accomplished our ultimate goal.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning the incremental need. We have to be so strategic in the way that we talk about this and roll this out and continue to add to it so people are able to digest what we're sharing with them. And I appreciate every single one of you. When I'm in DC, I've talked to all of the legislators I've talked to about all the things that you're doing, and your stories and what your accomplishments have helped me to push those conversations forward with our legislators. So thank you for making my job a little bit easier. And also, I'm so proud that Oregon has hosted 2 cohorts of Heroic Hearts Project veterans, and we hope to be doing that more so that we can scale and not have to continue leaving the country. Thank you all.